بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وبارك على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. Alhamdulillah, in our previous lesson we were discussing the chapter pertaining to Tayammum and the rulings in relation to Tayammum and how it's performed in. It's a sifat to Tayammum. And we mentioned some of the shurut that are present as well when performing Tayammum. That there are some specific conditions. And from these conditions were what? Do you remember? What were the conditions? No.
The inability to use water.
No. So the inability to use water. And what can that mean? What could that comprise? But how is there inability to use water? Is my question.
No water present.
There's no water. So his inability to use water because it's not there.
Or the water could harm you.
The water can be harmful for you. In what way?
You could have sickness and you use it could increase in that illness.
You have an illness and using the water could increase the illness or
Cold. Yeah. Severe cold.
in terms of illness. Something else. Because that would just increase the illness to death. Yeah. What else?
If you're injured and
Delay
delay the cure.
the cure. Delay the cure. Can be a means of delaying the ilaj. Now, as well as that, when it comes to not being able to use water, then there are other means as well, or other reasons why a person would not be able to use water in terms of harm. What's another example that we mentioned as well?
Lack of water.
Lack of it. What do you mean?
You're afraid that you're not going to be able to, for example, in the desert or something, and a certain amount of water, like drinking water.
No. So another example as well is if you have it's not a case that the water in this scenario is ma'doom. So it's not a case in this scenario there's no water at all. However, there's a small amount of water, meaning that if you were to use that water, it would be a harm to you due to the fact that you would not be able to purify it yourself, or you wouldn't be able to quench your thirst rather. So if you use that water, you wouldn't be able to quench your thirst, and it may cause greater harm in terms of illness in that regard, dehydration, and anything else. So that's Shaykh al-Am, generally speaking, that is the first condition as to when you make Tayammum. The second,
Not performed before its time.
now, so then we have the mention of the time as well. That the Tayammum is mentioned, or the Tayammum is performed in its correct time. Now, I'm not telling you the Tayammum is performed in the correct time. And what discussion do we have around the time? You mentioned something more about that. In terms of time itself. Is that absolute? Do we say, okay, khalas, the person must perform Tayammum within its time? The time for the Salah.
No.
My fellow.
If he wants to pray a nafila prayer, he can do it before it's obligatory prayer time.
If he's performing a nafila prayer, then
He can do it whenever.
There's no time restriction.
There's no time.
there's no time restriction for the Tayammum.
There is.
You can make wudu tayammum before its time or at its time.
Why? You can make Tayammum before its time or at its time. Right, there's something wrong with the fiqh. You can make Tayammum before its time or at its time.
Because it takes the place of wudu, which you can do that with.
No. So essentially, the reason why you're performing Tayammum is because it takes the place of the wudu. It's in place of wudu. And so, as we know, with the wudu, you can perform the wudu at any time. Now, you can perform the wudu at any time. And there are two specific rulings when it comes to performing wudu, which we mentioned. And they were what?
Performing it before its time, which is the sunnah.
Performing it before its time, which is actually no sunnah. Now, so performing the salah before its time, which is actual sunnah. And the second, and performing it at its time is an obligation. Now, performing it at its time is an obligation. So this is the ruling when it comes to performing wudu. So if now we're saying that tayammum is in the place of wudu, then it will take on the ahkam of that as well. It will take on the rulings that are for the wudu. Does it make sense? Jay. However, if the person was to perform the tayammum before the time of the salah, and then the time of the salah comes and they find water, then they have to make wudu. Now, then they have to perform wudu. Because at this point, it cannot be said that they can perform tayammum because the reason or the illah for that udhr, for that exception for them to perform tayammum is no longer there. So what the reason why they could perform tayammum is no longer there, and so that in this scenario they have to perform the wudu. And we equated that, we mentioned something similar to that as well, which was what? Fasting and what specifically about fasting?
Fasting, traveling, and Ramadan.
Traveling. So, and what did we discuss about that?
That once that it has been removed, then you return back to your original state, and you return back to fasting.
So if the person breaks his fast and he's traveling, and then he returns to his residence during the nahar of Ramadan, during the day of Ramadan, for example, or during the day of an obligatory fast, then in this scenario he must continue to fast. Now, because the reason for him breaking that fast is no longer there. The reason for him breaking the fast is no longer there. Now, does it make sense so far? And so this is the same thing that we're discussing with the tayammum. Now, the third condition was what?
Intention.
The person's intention. Now that they have the intention to perform the tayammum. So they have the intention to perform a tayammum. So like any action of ibadah, you must have the intention to do that action and for it to be an action of ibadah. And that it's not a case that they're merely just performing an action. So, along with that as well,
The use of the earth, which is pure.
using the earth which is pure as well. Using the pure earth. So as for the affair of the actual tayammum itself and its sifa, then how is it performed? How do you perform tayammum?
You strike the earth,
Strike the earth,
don't hurt yourself,
don't hurt yourself, don't make a mess.
and then wipe over the face and then the hands.
Wipe over the face and wipe over the hands.
What about the best one?
Wipe some of the hand then over the face.
Wipe over the hands, wipe over the face. What about the basmala? Okay. So what we can do with all this colour?
The difference was with you do the face first, that was related back to Prophet ﷺ, whereas the hands first was related to the Sahaba, but it wasn't, there was no narration from Prophet ﷺ to do with that.
To do with the hands first.
With the hands.
Isn't it the one that he's referring to is up to the elbow?
Yeah.
The one that Prophet ﷺ was just the hands.
So what are we saying then in terms of the sifa al wudu?
That is up to the wrists, that's classed as the hands and not the elbows.
So up to the.
It's just the hands.
So in terms of what, before we get to that,
Striking it, the face, and wiping.
okay,
It says slap the dust with your palms.
with your palms, okay, that's with the palms.
The excess dust off them,
Hmm.
and then wipe the face and both hands up to and including the wrist.
So the face and then the hand.
Then the hands.
Okay.
What about the best one?
Put two.
The basmala. What about the basmala? Is a good question.
It's first.
It's first.
No, after the intention.
So after intention, you say the basmala. In terms of the basmala, then in relation to that, then it's not something mentioned as a specific sifa from the sifat of the tayammum, as it is for the wudu, for example, or as it is for the ghusl. However, no doubt, any action a person does, he begins with the basmala for that matters. Now, so we say wipe the face and wipe the hands. But we have a narration that says wipe the hands and wipe the face.
Yeah, wipe
We have a narration that says wipe the hands and wipe the face. Now, so what we said is what? What was the conclusion we came to? That there is no specific tartib, no specific order when it comes to performing the tayammum. So when it comes to performing the tayammum, you can wipe the hands and then the face. You wipe the face and you wipe the hands. Now, you do either or. So, going then, finally, what we was discussing as well, and Brother Abu Muhammad inadvertently entered into the mas'ala, is in relation to where do you wipe, which parts of the hands do you wipe? Do you wipe up to the elbow, up to the wrist? We're saying the wrist. Everyone's saying the wrist. Why?
Because
We should delete.
the hadith that was narrated from the Prophet
The hadith narrated from the Prophet ﷺ,
mentioned up to the wrist,
right, from up to the wrist, okay?
whereas the ones narrated by the companions was up to the elbows.
So the one that was narrated, it was narrated as a narration which was, remember the terminology? Mawquf. A narration in reality was mawquf. So, mawquf meaning what? That's ascribed to whom? The Sahabi. Naam. So the narration is ascribed to the Sahabi. Whilst the narration which is marfu' is ascribed to who? The Prophet ﷺ. So when we say it's mawquf, then no doubt this is a call of Sahabi, or fi'l of Sahabi. But then we have the call of Nabi ﷺ, or the fi'l of Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam. In this scenario, this mas'ala, it wipes up to the palm, to the wrist. And so, if you have a ta'arud between qawl al-Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam and qawl al-Sahabi, if you have some form of contradiction or difference between the speech of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the speech of our companion, then of course which takes precedence? Is that of the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam? No, that's what takes precedence. So what else is a proof of that as well? That we wipe with the hand, wipe concerning the hand. Al-Āyah. So the word, the word of the ayah regarding the sifat, the sifat al-wudu. So now there was. عفوا تفضل.
فتيمموا سعيدا طيبا فامسحوا بوجوهكم وايديكم الى المرافق.
فاغسلوا الوضوء نعم وجوهكم وايديكم الى المرافق. طيب فاذا
يعني جاز ولا عند المرفق يعني بس كان
لأن الله تعالى ذكر المرافق يعني.
المرافق نعم.
صحيح. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the ayah referring to the wudu, He mentions the elbows. And so what we understand from this is that whenever the word yad or aidi, whenever the word hand atlaq is mentioned just as the hand, then it's referring to the hand up to the wrist. Right? And so when the word aidi, the word hand referring to the hands, is mentioned within this ayah here, then with this ayah is referring to the hands up to, or the arm up to the elbow, because the elbow is actually mentioned when talking about the ayah of wudu. How do we know that it's referring to, when you just mention hand, it's referring to the up to the wrist? Why? What is the proof that we know?
The fact of cutting the hand of the feet is cut the wrist.
No. The ayah referring to the sariq والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما جزاء نعم بما كسبوا. يعني so referring to the thief, the male thief, female thief, that Allah Ta'ala mentions the cutting of the hand. But what is affirmed by way of cutting of the hand in this regard is up to the wrist. And that is not cutting of the whole arm, forearm. Jayid. So in terms of tayammum, then it's up to the wrist. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. Jazakumullah khairan. As for today, then, and Allah Ta'ala knows best, I doubt we will complete to the bab. But alhamdulillah, no rush. But as for today, we intend, insha'Allah ta'ala, to begin a bab al-Hayd. So the chapter referring to menstruation. And بالصراحة, if we were to be completely upfront and honest, it's a chapter which has difficulty with it. Now, it's a chapter and it has masail which have difficulty within them. To the extent that Imam Ahmad, raḥimahullah, he mentions that I studied this affair of al-Hayd, the rulings related to menstruation, for 9 years before I began to understand it. So, it's there are intricacies in them, and inshallah we'll try to read through some of the masail in a manner which is as concise as possible and simplified as possible, so that we can all, inshallah, benefit and understand these masail, inshallah. And so, the first thing mentioned in terms of Bab al-Hayd, the chapter of menstruation, is يمنع ويمنع 10 أشياء. And so, menstruation prevents the woman from 10 things. 10 things. فعل الصلاة ووجوبها وفعل الصيام والطواف وقراءة القرآن ومسح المصحف واللبث في المسجد والوطأ في الفرج وسنة الطلاق واعتداد بالأشهر نعم ويوجب الغسل والبلوغ. So it prevents from 10 things as mentioned. It prevents from 10 things. And so Ibn Qudāmah, raḥimahullah, he mentions these 10 things. He mentions the first 2 which are together. He mentions the first 2 together. So he mentions the salah wa wujubiha. So he mentions the salah first. I don't mention to can perform the salah wa wujubiha. Naam. And so the salah, that's clear. That the woman cannot perform the salah. And this is due to the statement of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in the hadith متفق عليه, where he mentions إذا أقبلت الحيض فدعي الصلاة. And so he mentions if the woman begins her menses, if you begin your menses, then leave the prayer. I leave off performing the salah. Does that make sense? Jade. So that's the first thing. The second is that it's upon her to leave off wujubiha. What is the meaning of wujubiha? Nah, but what is this in relation to the salah? Tahara? Tahara. Something in relation to the wujud, obligation. If you leave off that which it obligates you as well.
You don't have to make it up after.
So you have to leave off the salah, and you do not perform qada. You don't perform the qada for the salah. And why is this mentioned? What's the significance of mentioning this? Why is it significant to mention this?
Because
Because when it comes to the fasting, there is qada. Now, so even if the woman is upon her menses, then she doesn't fast, then it's upon her to make up that fast. That's upon her to make up that fast. And so, this is based upon the narration of Aisha radiallahu anha, which mentions كنا نحيد على عهد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فنؤمر بقضاء الصوم ولا نؤمر بقضاء الصلاة. This is hadith again متفق عليه. And so she mentions radiallahu anha that we were at the time of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we would begin our menses, would have our menses at the time of the Prophet, of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we were commanded with making up the fasts. However, we were not commanded with making up the prayer. And so these two are mentioned together. The affair of the salah is mentioned, as well as the affair of the siyam, the fasting. Thereafter, it mentions وَفِعْلَ الصِّيَامِ وَفِعْلَ الصِّيَامِ. And so the fasting woman again is prevented from fasting. And the menstruating woman rather is prevented from fasting. What's the proof of that? The menstruating woman is prevented from fasting. Now, what's the proof though?
Hadith that you just mentioned of Aisha.
The hadith I actually just mentioned. No, hadith I actually just mentioned. So sometimes we're on it. Sometimes the answer is right in front of you. Now, if you're writing notes, there. So the hadith, or the proof, is the hadith of Aisha, where she mentions that we would begin our menses in the time, or would have our menses in the time of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we were commanded to make up our fast, and we were not commanded to make up our prayer. Likewise as well, you have a hadith, again, narrated by Aisha, radiallahu anha, where it mentions, أَلَيْسَ إِحْدَاكُمْ إِذَا حَاضَتْ لَمْ تُصُمْ وَلَمْ تُصَلِّ قُلْنَا بَلَى. And so it mentions that, was it not the case that if one of you were to begin the menses, that you were to be upon the menses, that you would not fast nor pray? And so thus we said, Bala, rather it is true. And this is a narration found in Sahih Bukhari. So we have the salah, qada, fasting. After that, what is mentioned as well is at-tawaf. That the fasting woman is prevented from performing, the menstruating woman, is prevented from performing the tawaf. And perform the tawaf at the Kaaba. And I guess, I'm hoping everyone knows what tawaf is now, where we circle around the Kaaba 7 times. And the proof of that, again, is hadith Aisha, where it mentions that the Prophet ﷺ said to her, إِذَا حِطِّ فَافْعَلِي مَا يَفْعَلُ الْحَاجِ غَيْرَ أَنْ لَا يَطُوفِ أو لا تطوفي بالبيت حتى يطهري وحتى تطهري. Hadith متفق عليه. And so the narration mentions, narration of Aisha, that if you were to begin the mentions, then do the actions that the Hajj does, and the pilgrim would perform. So perform the manasik al-Hajj, perform the rituals, the rites of Hajj. Except, or other than the tawaf. So you perform all the rites of Hajj, except for you performing tawaf. Until you purify yourself, or until you become pure. And so this is the narration of Aisha. The narration of Aisha, radiallahu anha. The next thing mentioned is Qira'atul Quran, the recitation of Quran. That the woman upon her menses should not recite Quran. However, the narration that is used for this as a proof is the following narration: لا تقرأ الحائض ولا جنب شيئا من القرآن. That the one that is menstruating, nor the one that is junub, the one that is in a state of janaba, should recite anything from Quran. Now this narration, barakallahu fikum, is a narration which is da'if. So it's a narration which is found in the Sunan of Abu Dawood and likewise Sunan of Tirmidhi. However, as Shaykh al-Albani mentions in his book Al-Irwa al-Ghalil, that this is a narration which is da'if. And he mentions that this narration, there are 3 turuq. It says 3 different asanid. Each one of them has weakness within them. Now, each one of them has weakness within them. So this was outlined by al-Albani, raḥimahullah. And so, based upon that, we can't build a hukum upon it. Based upon the fact that the narration is weak, we cannot build and base a hukum in a particular ruling upon that. Thereafter, you have وَمَسْ الْمُصْحَفِ لِقَوْلِهِ سبحانه وتعالى لا يمسه إلا متطهرون. And so then you have the one that is menstruating, that she is prevented from touching the mushaf. Prevented from touching the mushaf. This is due to the āyah, which Allah Ta'ala states that they should not touch it except for those that are in a state of purity. And so this is, within this ayah, is a clear indication of the fact that the individual cannot perform or cannot touch the mushaf in the state of purity. And so if the woman is menstruating, then of course she's not going to be in a state of purity. Now, she's not going to be in a state of purity. Allah Ta'ala knows best. Thereafter, it mentions وَلُبْثَ فِي الْمَسْجِدِ, i.e. that she stays in the masjid. That she stays in the masjid. And this is mentioned as also something which is something that prevents the woman from when she's menstruating, that she's prevented from this. And Now, and so, again, there's the proof which is used is the narration لا أحل المسجد للحائض. يعني I do not permit the masjid or attending of the masjid for the woman that is menstruating. This narration is again found in Sunan Abi Dawud. However, again, there's da'f with it. Now, there's a weakness within this narration. And so, again, each of these chains, there's weakness within it. And again, so we wouldn't say that we can build a ruling upon that particular narration. Thereafter, Ibn Qudāmah mentions, وَوَتَأَلْ فِي الْفَرْجِ, يعني that the menstruating woman is prevented from sexual relations, يعني sexual relations when it comes to the halal or itiyan, zawja, when a person approaches the woman where Allah Ta'ala has permitted. Now, where Allah Ta'ala has permitted, raḥimahullāh. And so this is also prevented for the menstruating woman. Na'am. And this is due to the statement of Allah Ta'ala, فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ وَلَا تَقْرَبُوهُنَّ حَتَّى يَطْهُرْنَ. And this is due to the statement of Allah Ta'ala, and stay away from the nisa, or do not approach the women whilst they are in a state of menstruating. And do not approach them until they purify themselves. And so, again, you have another narration that also supports this. And it is the narration where it mentions, the Prophet ﷺ mentions, إِسْنَعُ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ إِلَّا النِّكَاحِ, where the Prophet ﷺ says, I do everything in terms of the actions or relations between the husband and wife, do everything except for an-nikah, yani the actual sexual relations. And so this narration here is found in Sunan Abi Dawud and also in Muslim as well, which is narrated by Anas ibn Malik. So the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam mentions, and so do all the actions except for a nikah. The word in nikah here is referring to the actual sexual relations. The word nikah is referring to marital relations here in relation to this particular hadith. And thereafter as well, it mentions وَالسُنَّةُ نعم وَالسُنَّةُ الطلاق. And the sunnah of talaq. What do you think is mentioned? Why this is mentioned here? What is meant by this here?
The timing of Allah. She's not there.
Why is it mentioned sunnah of talaq?
Period of talaq, the zaman.
The period of talaq? No.
There's a period.
No.
She can't be divorced when she's on her menses.
She can't be divorced while she's on the menses. So why mention sunnah though, specifically though?
Because there's a period.
Because there is a talaq which is bid'ah. Naam. So while she's on her menses, she cannot be divorced. She cannot be divorced, but her husband cannot divorce the woman on the menses, and it be regarded as being a sunnah. Naam, the sunnah talaq. It can be bid'ah talaq. So a man could divorce a wife whilst on the menses, and now this is bid'ah. And from what the there's a discussion amongst Ahlul Ilm whether it actually counts as a genuine divorce. And from what's apparent, Allah Ta'ala knows best, then it actually does count as a divorce. So, if the man was to divorce his wife while she was on her menses, then this, first and foremost, this would be an action of bid'ah. This is bid'ah talaq, and it's an innovative action in terms of divorce. So he's blameworthy. He's blameworthy in that regard. However, it does not now mean that the talaq does not occur. So it does not now mean that there isn't a talaq. Rather, the talaq does occur. Na'am, the talaq does occur. However, the person is blameworthy. So if the person was to divorce the wife while she was on her menses, then all of the ahkam for any talaq would apply in this regard, in this scenario. Now, all of the ahkam for the talaq would apply in this particular scenario. For example, if the person was to divorce the wife whilst on the menses, then upon him at that point in time would be to live with her for that period of time, for the period of 3 months. Now, whilst whether or not he takes her back in that period is, depending on that every situation or scenario. However, that period will begin from then. Likewise, if it was as referred to as a talaq ba'in, where it was the final talaq, then this would still be the case, and the man would have to leave the wife, and he would not be able to take her back unless she marries again, unless she was to marry again and consummate that marriage as well. And so this is what is mentioned in relation to that. And now, then after that, we have wa'tidad bi ashhur. And so, likewise as well, the iddah for this woman applies with the months. Now, so her period applies with the months, and it's based upon her menses. So we do not now say, for example, when we say the woman is divorced and there's her iddah period for 3 months, we don't literally count 3 months. Now, rather, the ibra is with her menses. So it's 3 menstrual cycles. Now, it's 3 menstrual cycles. Because from the hikam, from some of the wisdoms and from the reasons why we have this particular iddah is what's from the reason why we have this iddah period. Because of pregnancy. Now, to ensure that this woman that has been divorced is not pregnant. Now, and so of course, pregnancy would be attached to, there's a link between pregnancy and menstruation. There's a link between pregnancy and menstruation. So hence, there's 3 menstrual cycles to ensure that there's no pregnancy. Because it's possible that the woman may be pregnant and still menstruate for a period of time. Now, so there's 3 menstrual cycles that are given to ensure that this isn't the case. Now, does it make sense? Jayed. So, thereafter, Ibn Qudāmah mentions, فإذا انقطع الدم أبيح فعل الصوم والطلاق ولم يبيح سائرها حتى تغتسل. نعم. And so, thereafter it mentions as well that when the blood is cut off, when the blood stops, it stops bleeding, and the menstruation stops, then it's permissible for her to fast and it's permissible to divorce her. However, it's not permissible for the rest of the actions until she performs the ghusl. Now, the rest of these actions are not permissible until she performs the ghusl. Does that make sense, Ikhwan? جيد. ويجوز استمتاع من الحائض بما دون الفرج. نعم لقول رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم اصنعوا كل شيء غير النكاح. And it is permissible that the man approaches his wife and enjoys his wife in any action other than, as we refer to again, a nikah, the actual sexual relations. And so he can physically enjoy his wife, however, not when it comes to marital relations. And this is due to, as mentioned, the narration where the Prophet ﷺ states that do whatever you wish now, or do everything that you wish with her, other than nikah, the marital relations. And this narration here, this particular narration specifically, is a narration which is based upon a qissa. It has a particular story to it as well. And it's a story about when a man approaches the Messenger of Allah, or two men approach the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, asking him what is permissible for the man to do with his wife whilst she is menstruating. And so the Nabi alayhi salatu wasalam responds with these specific words, as we mentioned within this hadith. Now he mentions these specific words that are found within this narration. So, thereafter, Ibn Qudāmah mentions, وأقل الحيض يوم وليلة وأكثره 15 يوما. And so the least amount of time that a woman can be regarded as being menstruating is for 1 day and 1 night, whilst the most will be considered as 15 days, 15 particular days. وأقل الطهر أقل الطهر بين الحيضتين 13 يوما ولا حد لأكثره. And so the least amount of time that can occur between two menstruation cycles, or not between two periods, is 13 days. And there's no particular amount for the most amount of time that can occur between them. So the least amount of time between two menstrual cycles will be 13 days. However, there is no maximum amount. Why? Pregnancy. Now, because we cannot now say, for example, that if the woman doesn't have her menstrual cycle, her menstrual period, after X amount of days, then she just has to stop praying, or she has to stop fasting, even if there's no sign of a menstrual period. Now, and likewise as well, as we mentioned, pregnancy is something that will stop the menstrual period for a period of months. And it's possible that that period will stop for a period of months, and thereafter as well, the breastfeeding will stop it for even longer. So it's understood that there's no upper limit, there's no maximum as well when it comes to that. Now, and so when it comes to the least amount, going back to the least amount, they said the least amount of time that that is regarded that a woman could be upon the period is what? 1 day, 1 day and 1 night. Now, 1 day and 1 night. Why is that? Why do we say 1 day and 1 night?
Could it happen during her sleep?
During the sleep? That's not the reason though. But it can happen in the point, I guess.
If it happens in a day, you count the night as well.
Why are we saying that this is the least amount?
So
1 day and 1 night.
it's actually known that, so it's determined as actually a menses rather than just a sort of
What does determine the menses? That's one thing. Something to do about something we mentioned earlier on as well though. Yeah, you're missing. It's in relation to the fact that there's specific ahkam that are related to the menstruating woman that will occur within the day. More specifically, the salah. And so because she's prevented from praying the salah, then this is something which is encompasses the whole day. And so we wouldn't say that the menstruation would occur is for X amount of hours, for example. But rather combining between what we mentioned and what Ahmed just mentioned as well, that you have she's prevented from praying, and also she has to determine if it's still the menstruation. And so if it comes to an end, so after 1 day, 1 night, that she discovers that she's no longer bleeding, then in this scenario, she would stop, or she would continue to perform those actions. Now, that the menses prevents her from. However, because there are specific actions that will occur within the day and the night, this is why this is given as the least amount of time. Does it make sense? Now, for the specific actions. And so, this is what we understand from the least, and now, and that's for the most. We'll go on to discuss that next lesson, inshallah, in more detail, bi'idhnillah, as for the larger amounts of time and the time between the periods, as we just discussed. Wallahu ta'ala a'lam. Jazakumullah khairan. Wa barakallahu feekum. Wa sallallahu wa barak ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. No.
When it comes to staying away from the masjid,
No.
are they allowed to come for lessons?
So what's apparent is that they can attend the masajid, but if so, as the narration is dark in the narration. But generally speaking, what we'd understand from that is that the woman shouldn't come for any reason, or just any general reason. But if there's a da'in, if there's a need for her to attend, Allah actually can attend. No, what's apparent.
The woman that doesn't stay in the house after what? Is that just classed as a sin?
The woman that doesn't stay in the house after talaq. No, it's blameworthy. And essentially this is something which many people fall into, where they will divorce, or the man will state the divorce and regard that as being the end of the marriage. Now, so in that regard, for example, in this day and age, divorce, you may divorce the wife, delete her number, block her WhatsApp, block her everything else, and that's the end. But the reality is, that's just the beginning of the process. So when he has pronounced the divorce, that's just the beginning of a process. And from that process is that they must live together, and he must still fulfill her rights for the period of 3 months, and 3 menstrual cycles. And Shaykh al-Uthaymeen also mentions, raḥimahullah, that it's upon her as well to beautify herself in the home for the husband in this scenario. And so, what we understand and what generally happens, mentioned, is that the person will mention the divorce, or the wife will ask for the divorce, and get the divorce, and leave at that point. And this is blameworthy, it's blameworthy. Because this particular iddah is there for a benefit. One of the benefits we mentioned earlier, to ensure that the woman's not pregnant. Also from the benefits as well, is a means of guaranteeing or seeking to guarantee that the person is sure that they know what they're doing. Because what is the common scenario in terms of divorcing? What is a common scenario is that the divorce is pronounced, and it can be pronounced in terms of a heat of a situation. Heat of anger, argument, whatever else. Now, but not anger where it's not regardless of being a divorce. Now, some people try to claim that I was angry. As Imam Sa'adi mentioned, raḥimahullah, that who doesn't divorce except in the state of anger. So it has to be extreme anger. But in this scenario, the scenario I'm mentioning now is one which plays out on a common basis. That there's a heated argument or heated dispute, and possibly one or both parties not fearing Allah. What ends up happening is that they both, or the husband pronounces a divorce. The woman leaves and goes to wherever she goes to, maybe back to her family, generally speaking. Now, first and foremost, she's meant to stay in the home for that period of time. Secondly, all that is going to occur, and what generally occurs, is that the shaitan is going to play upon that separation. So the shaitan is going to take advantage of the fact that they're separate from one another. He's going to take advantage of the fact that the husband's in one place, the wife's in one place. When you watch Swiss Zoj, when you watch Swiss Zoja, he gives the waswas, it gives, when it comes to the husband, whisper to him, can't believe she said that in an argument, can't believe this, can't believe that. And whisper to the wife, that's a shame. Can't believe I actually divorced you, X, Y, Z. So it builds up greater aminosity. So it builds up now an affair of anger, hatred between the spouses. So if, however, now, both of these parties, the same scenario, both of these parties are well aware of the shara, well aware of legislation, and so they both remain within the home, then there's 3 months for them, if they're both sincere, to try and rectify that, whatever's caused them to reach that point. Now, if, for example, now, they reach the point of the 3 months expiring, they lived in the same home together, there was every opportunity, an ample opportunity to reconcile. They still don't reconcile. At that point, you could say, you know what, we just shouldn't be together. Nah, this is not something which is good for me, good for you. As people generally say at point A, it's not good for me, it's not good for you, I'm going back here, or you go here, and whatever else. No. Rather, it should be a case that they follow this particular process that has been outlined by the Deen of Islam for hikmah. So if now, for example, the wife says, I really can't stand him, or the husband says, I really can't stand her, if after 3 months of knowing that a divorce or separation is imminent, you still are not together, then you really were, truly couldn't stand them. And at that point, you can say, look, we can separate. But of course, separate in an amicable way, of course, as well. Allah Ta'ala knows best. So it's important that the short answer to your question is that now they're blameworthy. But in more details, we mentioned that it's something that people need to avoid as well. Because generally speaking, we want to avoid anything which is mukhalif al-shar. We want to avoid anything which opposes the deen and opposes the sharia. Because no doubt the sharia has only come for our benefit as insan. There's nothing within the sharia which is to our detriment. It's all for our benefit. And we're not warning against something except that thing that we're warning against is to our detriment as ultimately. Even if it seems to be something good for us. So that's something which a lot of people need to take heed of. But Allah Ta'ala knows best. Allah.
I'm sorry to ask. Would a man perhaps says it 3 times all in one go? Does that count as?
The scholars differ when it comes to the husband. If he pronounce the divorce 3 times in one go. Some of them say no, it's all 3 count. Some of them say no, it's 1. It's just 1. Now, from what is apparent, it goes back to his intent, right? So if, for example, and this, first and foremost, if he pronounces all 3 in one go with the intent of 3, then it's bid'ah. It's bid'ah, it's an innovative practice. However, again, just as we were referring to the husband divorcing the wife upon the menses, it doesn't now mean that it doesn't occur. It doesn't mean that the divorce is not still valid. So, if the husband was to divorce the wife with the intent of 3 times, so he says it 3 times, it meaning 3 times, then in this scenario, it occurs 3 times. Now, so it occurs 3 times. And then, of course, this means now that he's not able to marry her again and to take her back unless she remarries and consummates that marriage. If, however, his intent when he's mentioning this is emphasis, so he's emphasizing just the first point, the first talaq that he's mentioning, then it goes back to that intent and it's just 1. But of course, it's upon him to fear Allah in that regard. So first and foremost, fear Allah upon what he's saying, what he states on the tongue, and fear Allah and be truthful in what he states was his intent. Because if, for example, this affair was raised to someone that's judging in that matter, and he says, I didn't intend it, but really he did intend it. Of course, it's an evil affair. So it goes back to what he intended in that regard, and Allah Ta'ala knows best. So, generally speaking, if he does it 3 times, he intends 3 times, which does occur now, where the person is not aware of the ahkam of talaq, the rulings of talaq. And so what ends up happening is that he'll state it 3 times thinking that this is the correct way to divorce, not realizing that he's ended up divorcing her 3 times without the need to do so. And so in that scenario, then it's blameworthy again because it's bid'ah. And secondly, it does occur. It is valid for all 3 times. He intended 3 times. So it's a must that the person adheres to that. And likewise, just as a side point, that no doubt it's always important to study when we anything we're going to do in our lives, in terms of ibadah, in terms of our deen, that we study it and we understand it. So we're going to pray, we study, understand the importance of the prayer, the sifat of the salah, how we pray. If we're going to we're coming upon Ramadan, we want to study the ahkam of Ramadan, the rule is referring to fasting. Marriage as well. Marriage is no different. That we study the rules of marriage. We study the rights of the wife, the rights of the husband. We study as men, we study the rights of the wife and the husband. Why? Because we study the rights of the husband, so we know what is due to us as husbands when we get married and we become husbands. And we study the rights of the wives, so we know what is upon us to give to our wives. Now, we study these things, and we should be well aware of these things. What I'd mention as a point to this as well is that people need to study at-talaq with that as well. Study the affair of divorce along with that. Not because they are seeking to get divorced, of course not. But like anything, you want to avoid it. And so you want to be from those that have basira in that regard. You have some clear insight and clear understanding of divorce so that you avoid it. And you're not from those individuals that end up in scenarios which are plentiful as well, where you say that I was in this scenario and I was in that scenario and I said this, is this a divorce? Or I said this to my wife in anger, was that a divorce? And so you should always be well aware of the ahkam before entering into it. And as well, of course, upon the principle, من تمام معرفة الشيء معرفة ضده. Upon the principle as well that in order to have a full and complete understanding of something, you must understand what opposes it. So if you want to fully understand a successful marriage and everything else, you must understand the ahkam that oppose it, which is divorce. Allah knows best. No. No.
We mentioned a thing which is called the حيض. عشان الأشياء للحيض لما يدخل. وأنت قلت اثنين إنهم ضعيفين في حديث ضعيف معناته ما يشتغل فيها.
نعم فالظاهر أن هذا ما يكون من الممنوع للحائض.
نعم.
لأن يعني الحكم بناء على حديث ضعيف. فما نستطيع أن نقول أن يكون الحكم هكذا إذا كان الحكم بناء على حديث ضعيف. نعم بارك الله فيك. The brother was asking that we mentioned from these 10 that 2 of them mentioned that there was a hadith da'if. So then what do we do with that basically? What's apparent is that if there is a hadith which is da'if, we cannot now say that we're going to base a ruling upon a hadith da'if. So we can't accept that these 2 things are from the things that are prevented from the menstruating woman. And Allah knows best.
Are they just mentioned because they're like common?
No, that might be the opinion of the author. Now that's his opinion, but it doesn't. But the reality is that there's da'f in that hadith, so we can't act on. No. Okay. بارك الله فيكم إخوان. جزاكم الله خير. حياكم الله. وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.